Hi, everyone. My name is Adebayo Oke Lawal, and I'm very excited to be here. So thanks for having me, everyone. And my brand is called Orange Culture. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. So that's me, of course. I think I look the same, right? Yes. So my brand, I started 9 years ago in 2010. I was a young 20-year-old boy who had dreamt so much about fashion, who had always wanted to be a designer and talk about fashion, make beautiful clothes. And literally, I did not know. I was in Nigeria growing up. I didn't really have fashion schools available to me. I didn't know where I was going to get the education from. I didn't really know how I was going to become a fashion designer. And I came from a very traditional home. My dad is a 9-to-5er, my mom's a 9-to-5er. And so when I said fashion design, you can guess the reaction. It was like, what do you think you're doing? And so I decided that I was going to figure it out. And I interned from when I was 15 years old till when I was 20. I would leave school and hide and sneak to work at fashion designers' houses. I would work with fashion shows. I would work at every place I could work just to learn, because I couldn't go to fashion because I was like, how else am I going to learn? And I would work everywhere until I was 20, and I saved all the money I had because I have a finance degree, so I'm actually a finance major. And I worked in a bank while I was going to work at fashion places. I would leave the bank at like 6 p.m. and go and intern with another designer and sew and do this and learn this and do all those things just so I could learn the craft. And so at 20, after I'd saved a lot, I had worked on Orange Culture and decided to launch the brand in 2010. Very bravely in Nigeria. And you will see why, because the story is none like there was when I was starting off. Oh yeah, so before I go into that, why did I start the brand Orange Culture? And a lot of people always ask me, why the name Orange Culture? I'm sure a lot of people are wondering why. Do I like the color orange? Is it my favorite color? Or is it because I look orange? Some people are like, oh, your skin tone is orange. Maybe that's why you call it Orange Culture. But none of that. So basically, when I was 15, I wrote an article called The Orange Boy. And this article was basically about me growing up in Nigeria. So I grew up very different from most boys. I remember I was thrown into an all-boys school, a very, very hyper-masculine all-boys school. And I was very tiny, a lot tinier than I am now, thanks to Jim. But I was really tiny. I had like big glasses. I'm actually legally blind, but I wear contact lenses now. Thank God for technology. So I wore glasses, and I would go to school. My voice was really tiny, and I would be talking, and then it would be like, talk louder, talk like a man, do this, do that, and there was always that aggravation like towards me because of just the way I represented myself. And so I was being bullied a lot. I would go home and complain, oh, they took my glasses, they broke it, they called me this, they called me a sissy, they slapped me, they did blah, blah, all of the stories that you can imagine. And so I was in this writing class, and we were told to write about colors. And I was 16 years old, and they gave us the color orange, and it was obviously at a very frustrating time in my life when I decided to write that article. And so I wrote this article called The Orange Boy, which was really just about me growing up in Nigeria and trying to fit into this idea of what masculinity was, who a man was, what colors a man should like, what life a man needs to live. And so Orange Boy was a representation of celebrating that sense of individuality. You know how colors are, blue, pink, red, those are typical colors, but I find that when you think of the color orange, it's not necessarily something that everyone's drawn to. It's not easy, it's not something that's, that's easy on the eyes. It's very like you have to look at it, absorb it, and then think about it before you think it's beautiful, or you hate it, or you love it. And so I found that that idea of what masculinity was, or I felt it was, or shouldn't have been, was a sense of individuality that needed to be explored. And I felt that orange was the color that was unique enough to embrace that. So Orange Boy was about a boy that was individual, he was unique, he didn't really fit in, but he celebrated despite. It was about saying that whatever society had called me to be wasn't who I wanted to be, and that's fine. There wasn't only one type of man, there wasn't only one yardstick to measure a man's masculinity, but there were various ways you could be a man. I could be a man at that time in a pink suit, and I wouldn't be thought of as less than because I was exploring a different color or a different shape or a different way to represent myself. And so Orange Boy became this article And I wrote it, and then my teacher took it and was like, oh, you know what, I'm going to publish this article. And so it got published, and at 16, I was given a section in a magazine. And boys and girls would write to me from all sorts of places saying, oh, I'm having these issues, I was being bullied, I was being abused, all sorts of things. And I was a 16-year-old boy trying to figure out why I was getting these articles. And so people would tell me, oh, this is happening. And when I read The Orange Boy, I felt like I could relate to you. And I could relate to what you represented and what you felt and what you've been through. And so when I started the brand, I wanted the Orange Culture brand to be a movement that celebrated the idea of diversity and celebrated the idea of individuality, and also sort of pushed against the idea of toxic masculinity or hypermasculinity. And I would rather say toxic masculinity because a lot of people don't like to use that, but toxic masculinity is a real thing. It's the type of thing where when a child picks up a toy, he's told he needs to pick up the action man, even though he's drawn towards the dollhouse. Or a boy wants to wear pink, and his dad is like, no, pink is for girls, blue is for boys. That is toxic masculinity. Because why? Who told us that those colors were meant for specific genders? Society. Why? Based on what? Do you wake up as a child, when you're born, do you cry and cry for blue? No, you don't. So how do you know that blue is for you? You don't. You don't know what the color is. As a child, does a child even care what blue or pink is? You don't really know. So those were the things that I wanted to challenge with the idea of orange culture, exploring that being a man should not be one thing. Being a woman should not be one thing. There's so many facets that should be celebrated, and we should be able to explore all of those things with the brand Orange Culture. And so when I started the brand in 2010, you can guess, I remember I launched my first collection in 2010, and I got the worst reviews ever. Like, people were sending me the worst emails in the world. I can't even, some people like, you need to kill yourself. And I remember it was so funny because it was as simple as the fact that I had a red suit, a man that was wearing a red suit. And a man wearing a red suit in 2010 was such a big problem for people. Now, everybody has a colored suit in their wardrobe. If you be the most masculine man in the world, you probably have at least green or some sort of, deviation from blue or black. Everybody explores different colors. But at that time, people told me that, oh, what are you pushing for? Men should not be women because they're wearing red suits. I'm doing this. People were sending me, oh, you're going to go to hell. And I remember I was just like, but I just put a man in a red suit. I didn't put lipstick on him. It was just a red suit. And it was so strange at that time. And I remember I read all these reviews. I read every one of them. And I cried. Oh my God, I cried so much. I cried and I was just like, what do I do? Do I just dump this? Do I go back to working in a 9-to-5? I worked in Shell, and I was like, should I go back to working in Shell? Should I apply for more 9-to-5? Should I dump this idea that, oh, this creative side is for me? Or should I push for this journey? And at that time, people would send me emails and DMs, and it was just a weird space. But one person sent me a DM and was like, oh, this brand really inspires me. And that was all I needed to hear. The fact that one person felt like this story was necessary and this story needed to be heard, and felt that they could relate to my pain or my emotions or my love, whatever the case was, I felt like that was enough for me to push the brand. And fast forward now to all of these amazing achievements, which I'm thankful for, because I've been a finalist for the LVMH Prize, and I'm one of the first Africans to be nominated for the LVMH Prize, nominated for the Woolmark Prize. I was actually the first African to be nominated for the Woolmark Prize. We've been featured in every magazine that you can think about, just because of this story that was once seen as totally irrelevant. So yeah, moving on, because that's not as important. But what motivates me? I'm motivated by stereotypes. Literally, I don't believe that you shouldn't question things. People are so easy to just say, okay, yeah, this system says that, oh, I should wear this, I should wear that, I should present myself this way. I should display myself this way. You know, it's crazy because I think about when it was so annoying for men to wear skinny jeans. When if you wore skinny jeans, you would be called all sorts of names. And guess what? Everybody now is wearing skinny jeans. Even the guys skating in the ramps, the guys who are rapping, the people who you would normally say, oh, these are representations of masculinity, are now exploring those things. So why exactly do we stick to these stereotypes, and why don't we question them? And that, for me, is really a huge motivation point, because that was what led to me questioning masculinity. Because if I didn't fit into something, didn't mean that I was wrong for not fitting into it. Because I didn't, align with these stereotypes, does that mean that maybe my life was totally wrong or it was unnecessary to talk about it? And so that's where Orange Culture's story came from. Toxic masculinity, I'm sure you can see how passionate I am about this, but I'm not because I feel like toxic masculinity has affected so many people. How many men are able to hug their dads? How many? I love that. That's amazing. How many men tell their fathers, I love you? How many men hold their brothers' hands on the streets or friends' hands and aren't afraid that they will be thought of as something else? How many people are able to just be themselves and not think that, oh my gosh, if I'm doing this, or if I'm sitting this way, or if I'm crossing my legs this way, or if my shorts are too short, that it's not a question of how strengthened I am as a man. Toxic masculinity is everywhere in our nation. And it's even worse within our continent because of so many different facets. But I wouldn't go too much into that. Political conversations. Orange Culture is one of those brands that likes to confront things head on. I'm very inspired by things I feel and experience, whether it is within my emotional space or my political climate. Coming from Nigeria, political climate is is rocky as hell. So a lot of the time, those are the kind of conversations that push me to decide to create something, push for some sort of collection or whatnot, but it definitely does inspire me, motivates me to create stuff. Emotions. Orange Culture is a very emotional brand, and so even within our stories, we like to explore the idea of emotional intelligence and the idea of men being able to be vulnerable, being able to explore connecting not just with other men, but even with women, and connecting with people without, feeling that they need to hide something. I mean, we all grew up in spaces where even if it didn't happen in your direct environment, it must have happened in some way extended, where people will tell you that don't cry. You're a man, don't cry. You're a man, speak louder. I remember when I was working, when I had a 9 to 5, I would go for meetings, and I'm very intelligent, and that's not even being, and I would be having intelligent conversations, and people would say, speak louder, speak like a man, I'm like, but I'm passing the information across, so does it really matter how loudly I speak or how, if my chest is like, does it really matter? But I was always confronted with that idea that I needed to just represent myself, bounce, walk, just pull your trousers up, just all of those things were just things that they just confused me. And so that whole idea of just being able to emote and express yourself in a more vulnerable manner and tell people how you feel when you're going through pain. If men will sit down and allow themselves to be vulnerable, a lot of relationships they have within them, their direct space with their brothers, sisters, wives, whatever the case is, would be a lot more developed, just so you know. I'm inspired by self-expression, which is also in tie with vulnerability. I'm inspired by progressive visualization and self-representation. And this really will tie into later, so I'll go on to that later. And I was bullied a lot growing up, so I told you about that. I'm misunderstood, so that was a huge part of my inspiration. Social change. So I say fashion can be used for social change. Why? I feel like, we've passed the phase where it was okay to just make clothes, make T-shirts, make a nice dress, make nice fitted pants. Now, it's about using fashion to create conversations, about using fashion to say, okay, what's going on in my direct environment? What can I do with fashion to start those conversations? And the truth is that not everyone, especially with our generation, is very in tune with just watching the news or just reading the paper. And so fashion, art, music, these are things that we can use to enlighten people and question things and ask people, to talk about things because they're a lot more lighthearted and a lot more visually stimulating. So with those things, you can use it to say, okay, this is what I want to talk about. 9 years ago, we started talking about masculinity and toxic masculinity in Nigeria. And now almost every brand is talking about it because we've pushed the conversation to the point where people are saying, okay, you know what, I need to question this. We've moved on to points where now we're counseling men and we're saying, okay, we did a collection 2 years ago called Pretty, and it was about boys who were being raped in school. And literally, we were able to use fashion to pull boys together to talk about their experiences that they couldn't talk about with their dads or with their direct family or whatever. And these boys were telling us about how, because of the way they were representing themselves or because of their emotionality, they were being bullied, they were being abused by cousins, by teachers, by whatnot. And it was just such an experience that I can never forget because I saw fashion as more than at that point in time. And I saw that fashion could be used to create such a stable environment and could be used to create conversations that people are so afraid to talk about because also fashion is more expressive than in lots of other industries. So you can use fashion to talk about things that people are afraid of without scaring people off. Fashion being used to tackle relevant conversations and issues. So basically I create prints for all of my collections. And one of the things that I think about when I'm doing orange culture is I hate cliches. So no, this is not to knock anyone's hustle, but I hate the idea that we have to use Ankara to be African. It gives me a headache. And literally, I just feel like, first of all, Ankara is not really made here in the continent. So why are we being told how to use Ankara? And why are we being told that if we don't use Ankara, we're not African enough? And so I decided to create my own prints and use our stories to create prints and fabrics that will also tell the story and will be more organically African because guess what? I'm African and I'm Nigerian. And so creating my prints, being inspired by where I'm from, is a way of telling my story through fabric and not using somebody else's version of our story that will go back to their own continents. The money is going back to them, or it's not going back to us, to then now tell our stories. And so that's how I started creating prints, which you'll see in the collection I'm going to show. Educating people. I use fashion, because I didn't have an education in fashion back home, I use fashion to have classes every year, and I bring people together and train people and talk to people about how they can build brands, because at the end of the day, if we're not using our industries or our opportunities to develop others, then what's the point? And for us as fashion people, especially coming from an industry where infrastructurally in continents, we're not really as developed as countries far and wide, we need to be able to use what we have to build other people up, and that's a way to create social change using the industry. What impact on orange culture created? Impact with the movement with toxic masculinity, positive light on Nigeria, because I was tired of hearing malaria, 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 poverty, poverty, poverty. You know how you see all those ads when you're abroad and there's a child picking up food from the ground, and that's the stamp for Africa. And so when you go abroad, they're like, oh, but how are you from Africa? You can speak English. Oh, really? Are you from Africa? Why do you dress weird? No. We can now show you that we're more developed, and I'm meeting the same people you're meeting when you're in America. I've met Kanye West. I've been nominated for Woolmarks with everybody else who has been in other countries. So guess what? Africa is developed enough to be represented the right way. And that's why it's important for us to tell our stories and not allow people to tell our stories for us. So I'm going to be very quick before they kick me out. I'm going to show you my Autumn/Winter 19, which you're the first people to see. It's called Don't Look Under My Skirt. And it's basically about society's inability to mind their business. It's about how society constantly tells us how to present ourselves to the world. And these are a few of my collections from the past to show you the orange culture world that we've lived in. 15 collections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's my first collection. Oh my God, wow. So I started from the past too, but that's basically the orange world. And now I'm going to show you a new facet of the orange world. So please enjoy. Love you guys.
Growing up for me it was normal. I had a normal childhood. But if you put it against the stereotype of what society thinks a man should be, growing up had its challenges. You know, you had to be stronger than most people. Well, I think society is concerned and bothered. The battle of acceptance is one I've chosen not to fight anymore. I just wear my skirt and I tell society not to look under.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, God.
Adebayo.
Thank you so much. Thank you.